that brings us kind of into our next segment of the show, which is talking a little bit of coaching, talking a little bit of big picture predictions for 2021. And let's just lead it off with the big one. Vancouver Whitecaps standings prediction for the regular season in 2021. I mean, last year was such a mixed bag. The Whitecaps have struggled in the few years prior. If just to refresh everyone's memory, the Whitecaps finished ninth, just outside the playoff bar because of that added kind of format in 2020. Where do we think that the Whitecaps finish in the Western Conference standings this year?
I'm just looking at the table, trying to see has anyone in the West because there hasn't been a lot of transfer movement.
Very little movement, very little in the way of designated players signed. It's been surprisingly quiet.
Right. Well, maybe not surprising given the pandemic.
I think some people thought that maybe there'd be a lot of, kind of buy low options out there, but its movement's been even more difficult, I think, than anticipated.
So let's just look at just looking at where everyone finished in the West last season.
I mean, so Houston Dynamo's a disaster.
Right, they're last, obviously. My God, have you looked at that team?
Real Salt Lake still has a lot to overcome in terms of their whole ownership situation, disgruntled players. I think they've still got a long way to go.
Right, and
LA Galaxy, it's a project. I don't know. That could go anywhere, I feel like.
Yeah, and they've only they've signed Victor Vasquez and some guy from France who scores 4 goals a year. I don't know. I'm not blown away by that. There's the Whitecaps, obviously. We think they'll be a little bit better, but not, crazy better. San Jose signed some guy who's a million years old who once played for Almeida. LAFC, they're still good. But
I think all those teams the rest of the way up from LAFC onward, so LAFC, FC Dallas, Colorado, Minnesota, Portland, Seattle, and Sporting KC are significantly better than the Whitecaps.
Yes, but are haven't moved very much from where they were last year.
Was that 6 or 7 teams that you listed off?
That's 7 teams that I listed off. So basically all the playoff teams except for San Jose, I would kind of put in a category of these are still teams that are kind of obviously better than the Whitecaps in terms of overall roster construction and success over the last couple of years.
Could be. I don't know. Well, I mean, Dallas's biggest move was selling a player. So I don't know. And then they signed a guy from Colombia who scored a lot of goals, but I saw a tweet once that was people think most stats analysis is super complicated, but most of it is saying, well, he scored 10 goals, but 5 of them were penalties in it.
Yeah.
And 5 of them were penalties in it for O'Brien, that guy they signed.
I like Dallas's pipeline though. They constantly pump out good young prospects and guys that are ready to contribute at the MLS level. So that's where I have some faith.
Yeah. Anyway, to cut a long ramble short, I'd say as the roster is currently constructed, they're probably around that last playoff space. How many teams even qualify? Because it was so weird last year. How many teams even qualify?
So I think 7. It's 7 normally, but I don't know how that works. Austin's in the West this year as well. Correct?
Yeah, but did we lose Nashville to the East permanently?
I don't think so. I think it's just for the sake of regionality. I think.
Yeah.
Just to continue on from last year. But yeah, we ended up getting Austin this year anyway. So I don't know. I imagine that when they're ready to go, we're going to get St. Louis too.
Yeah.
And then maybe we get Nashville back. I don't know, because then Charlotte will be in the league, or I don't know. I think basically it comes down to, is there going to be 7 teams that are better than Vancouver? And I get the feeling that there's going to be.
Yeah. It's all going to come down to Cavallini will score goals, but I'm not sure who else is going to score goals. That's the biggest thing holding me back from saying slam dunk, they're in the playoffs. Dahomey, he never saw a highly speculative shot he didn't like, but that doesn't always translate into a ton of goals. Caicedo, not a huge goal scorer. He has more than double the number of career assists than he does goals. We obviously hope he'll develop and improve, but you can't necessarily count on that next year. Theo Bair kind of depends on minutes. The center backs will probably chip in with some goals, but not a ton. It's difficult to say. Like, but I guess I'll seventh. Sure, why not?
So yeah, it's 13 teams in the West, same 12 as last year with the addition of Austin, Nashville still in the East. So there's going to be 14 teams in the East, I believe, this year. So that makes up the 27 in the league.
I would personally go with 8th through 10th for a finish to them. Like, I feel like it's going to be tight again, and they could finish anywhere between those three spots. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the fight for the last playoff spot in the West is just going to be an absolute knife fight between like 5 different teams. And I mean, like Austin is kind of the great unknown, but they've had some really ambitious signings. So
I really like their roster, actually.
Yeah, so just because they're an expansion team, by the end of the year, I think they're going to be a playoff caliber squad. So I think like 8th. I think they just miss out 8th or 9th.
Didn't they sign like 4 Paraguayan guys who all have the same agent? I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Going the Carl Robinson route, huh? Yeah. Man, I don't know. I just don't want the season to end on some points per game bullshit like it did last year, where Colorado gets in because their entire roster gets COVID and they don't play for 3 weeks or some crap like that. If the Whitecaps don't make the playoffs and they finish in 10th and they play out a full season, fine. It's whatever. I could see them potentially making it, but that may have more to do with whether or not other teams underperform rather than Vancouver overperforming. So I think they're going to finish in like 9th, but they'll have a shot of getting the playoffs. Just they'll fall a little short. And swear to God, I hope it has nothing to do with points per game this year. I really do.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm going to say run it back. The Whitecaps are going to finish 9th in the Western Conference again. And I've said this in other formats and with other stuff. I think that the Whitecaps this year are going to be the team they thought they were last year. Mark DeSantos, Axel Schuster talking about, we were competitive for a playoff spot. We were almost there. That was a bit of revisionist history, if you ask me, last year. Like, some of the underlying numbers were pretty scary. But I think this year they're genuinely going to be right on the cusp of the playoff spot, but a little bit short. So, I think some of those bottom teams are slightly improved, just like the Whitecaps are slightly improved. And as Andrew said, I think those final couple spots are going to be a bit of a knife fight. That's a perfect way to put it. And I guess I'll add as like a little bonus over under, and we don't have to maybe get into it or explain it super deep. Over under, who finishes higher in the standings, Vancouver Whitecaps or Austin FC?
I know we all just had a super positive take on Austin, but I'm an Austin skeptic at this point. I would say I think Vancouver will finish higher. And also, I wanted to touch a little bit quickly on you talking about Schuster and MDS talking about we were so close. They'll usually cite the last 7 games of the season as a point of really big improvement. Which, if you take into the numbers, it is true. Their numbers should improve a lot over those last 7 games, but also, it's 7 games. It's a tiny, tiny sample size. You can't just say, that's going to extrapolate over a full season. It might, but there's no reason to assume that.
Right? I think that the truth lies somewhere in between. Were they better than the beginning of the season? Yes. Was the last part of the season good? Yes. But I think the truth is not necessarily, we'll just take those 7 games and expand that to a full season, and that's who we are as a team.
Yeah, right.
It's pretty unfair to go with that logic.
That's very cherry picked, I think.
Yeah, if you're gonna do logic like that, you may as well just be well, what if they had an entire season of playing LAFC and nobody else? 34 games against LAFC, then they concede 300 goals or something like that.
We went in a 3-game winning streak. We basically would be undefeated over a full season if we played like that.
Discount the 14 games we lost, then
yeah.
Yeah, it's like saying that for last season, if the last 7 games were so great, then by all means, the first 16 didn't mean anything. They still count.
I think there is. It's not totally divorced. There is some reason to think that that weird middle bit like when they were in Canada and then when they were first in Portland, that's not totally representative of what the team was. But at the same time, like, I don't think you can then say, oh, well, then actually we were good because we were good for a different, like, small stretch. Like, it's just hard to say. Like, last year was so weird, but yeah, I think Sam is right. It's somewhere in between those two.
Okay, well that brings us to another question mark and something that's not really talked about all that much. Or I think, if this was a hockey team in the market, which a situation we're all kind of familiar with, if it was a coach in a contract year, there'd be a lot more discussion about it. But Marc Dos Santos, this is the final year of a 3-year contract. They just added a new assistant coach, and his year's a multi-year deal, while Marc Dos Santos, his staff are still kind of, it's a question mark after this year based on what we predicted, which is kind of like a competitive team, but one that just misses the playoffs. Does that mean that Marc Dos Santos returns for 2022, or do the Whitecaps look in a different direction? How do people feel about the coaching staff and the future of it moving forward?
I feel like as long as the team doesn't totally collapse, he'll probably be back. It seems like he and Schuster have like a pretty close relationship, and Schuster's like pretty confident in him. Like, I think Schuster's like perception of him is a little different from like, because for the fans, we've sat through 2 really bad seasons with him at the helm. And, to what degree that was his fault is, people differ. But I feel like Schuster feels like that first season kind of doesn't count because he wasn't here yet. So he's not necessarily factoring that in. I don't know. I kind of felt like I'd kind of come to become at peace that he was gone after last season, and then Schuster was like, "Oh, he's staying," and I was like, "Oh, well, okay." I don't think that's necessarily like, I'm not like outraged that he's saying, but I am kind of like,
Well, I think to that point, like, I'm sure the perspective of the organization is going to be, why did we have now set up this infrastructure. As soon as we set up this infrastructure, we're now blowing up a key part of that infrastructure, and there's a certain amount of starting from scratch that comes with that. I mean, obviously, Schuster and the scouting department will remain, but I guess I have a hard time unless we really shit the bed. I think we're kind of in this strange marriage with Marc Dos Santos for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, personal thoughts aside, I mean, for me personally, he would be on like, this would be a gift year for Marc Dos Santos. He'd be trying to hope that he does something well, otherwise it'd be the end of him. But even if it does end up being an underwhelming season, I don't see the Whitecaps let him go unless we have like a wooden spoon at the end. Even then, maybe if we play with enough fight and grit and show resilience. But outside of that, yeah, I could definitely see him coming back for 2022, whether that be a good thing or not.
Fine lines.
I mean, I feel like if he manages to make the playoffs, then like it's pretty much guaranteed that he's back. Which,
I had to jump off camera for a second, but yeah, I pretty much agree with that sentiment. I mean, like, if he makes the playoffs, yes, like I think he's coming back for sure. I think it comes down to how demonstrable the players appear to have improved. Like, if they look cohesive, but they're still losing games, and it's kind of has a little more to do with the quality of other teams being better than them, but at the same time, the Whitecaps just look like they're playing better, they're playing as a team, then yeah, I could see like argument for keeping them around. If they just look like hot trash set on fire and somehow luck their way into like 10th place, then no, he's going to be gone. So it just comes down to like how, like, what the quality of the team is, how well he gets them playing together, because you can still lose but play well. You can win and play terribly. I mean, we could go back to 2015 and imagine kick and run soccer with, playing the ball out of the back from your center backs, but, you have a guy who can score goals or something like that. Like, that could still be a thing, but the team could still be shit anyway. So I think it kind of comes down to, like, whether or not he gets the team playing well together. If it's cohesive, yeah, he'll stick around even if they miss the playoffs.
I would say like my big area of Mark Dos Santos concern is like how much he changed. So like if we think about like last season, they started out in the before times with this sort of fairly conservative 4-4-2 that was like, we limit the other team to bad shots and we get a small number of good shots. And that was like not, it wasn't exactly total football, but it was functional. It kind of worked. And then there was a really long time of like every week it was a new formation. Like, oh, this week we have a 3-5-2. We have a 4-4-2 diamond. We had that for a while. That was the new hotness for a while. That was being talked about as like the formation that they were going to build around. And then they had a game where they got killed with it, and they were like, oh, actually, never mind. And then finally, at the end of the season, they found some form, going back to exactly the same 4-4-2 that they started with. And it's like, well, what was the point of all of that? Like, so I'm just like, I it might not be perfect, but I just hope Mark does not like try to be too clever for his own good, and just like, stick with, it's not what we were like talking about when he first came here, but that 4-4-2 is functional. We've had 2 seasons of chaos. It's time for some stability. It's time for the new economic policy, as I called it in one of my articles. Yeah, it's time to keep it simple, at least for in the short term.
Oh man, I hope that the 4-4-2 is the flat 4-4-2 is not the answer to all of our problems. That would be profoundly disappointing if that's the case. But I guess I'll provide a few quick thoughts on Dos Santos before I kind of give my statement about his future here. I think the things that concern me most about his management is the use of substitutions and the lack of in-game adjustment. That's something that has really troubled me over the last couple of years. I feel like there isn't that willingness to admit that whatever they're doing in the first 45, 50, 60 minutes isn't working, and then it's time to inject some positivity into the match. And that's part of the reason I think why they didn't have a single draw last year, is they got out coached late in matches. Other teams would change the momentum and the Whitecaps would just stay the same. Now, speaking about his coaching future, I think I echo what most of you guys were saying, in the sense that I think almost no matter what, it feels like he's coming back in 2022. And I would even almost flip this on its head. I think that if by the end of the year we're realizing that the roster is actually a disaster, it's not as, the additions didn't work, it's not as good as we thought it was, and the Whitecaps are, languishing down at the bottom, I could see Mark Dos Santos deciding he doesn't want to come back in 2022 and he's going to go take an assistant coaching job somewhere else. But I think that Axel Schuster and Mark Dos Santos are in all likelihood in this together for the long run. And I don't think that results really change much this year. That first year, really, Axel doesn't even consider it. And in a lot of ways, I think when Mark Dos Santos and Schuster talk to each other, they're saying that last year really didn't count because of everything that was going on with COVID. So I think they're giving themselves 2 free years. This is the first year. And even this year, if you want to be charitable, like they're already talking about how challenging Utah is going to be. So I don't know. I think these 2 guys are back in 2022, basically no matter what. Unless all of a sudden Dos Santos has a change of heart and, and Bob Bradley wants him to be an assistant again or something.
Whitecaps, like, fielding their most expensive team ever and still being bad would truly be the darkest timeline.
Okay, last question I have, and this is kind of a wide open one. It's about youth development. It's about teams that aren't the first team, and it's kind of a 2-parter. I want to gauge your guys' level of concern with just the state of the Whitecaps infrastructure that isn't the first team. Now, it's obviously been a really difficult time for sports at developmental levels everywhere. Like, getting in matches has been incredibly challenging. But even before COVID, the Whitecaps had this development squad that wasn't in a league, really wasn't playing matches, the roster, they're constantly losing players. I guess the question I have is, with the rise of the CPL, with the growth of university soccer, with just the growth of other options, how concerned are you about the Whitecaps' ability to bring in young players, develop them? We've kind of seen that last group graduate to the first team. Is that a big concern going forwards? And is there anyone on your radar right now that you think we should watch out for? Because the talent pool is relatively thin.
As a corollary to that, I would say it's also concerning their stubbornness not to mine the CPL for talent. And I think they decided not to pursue Bustos this offseason. They decided not to pursue Sissoko this offseason. Like pieces like that, especially given how much of a mess our international roster spot situation is at the moment. Not that that can't be rectified fairly easily, but, you know, if you're not going to develop them in-house, you do have kind of a natural feeder system to look towards and maybe avail yourselves of pretty cheaply. It's a potential, at least for now, market inefficiency, and they haven't really decided to do that for whatever reason yet. So hopefully they maybe look more towards signing some CPL guys who are worthy in the future, and hopefully the upcoming MLS developmental league thing that we still don't really know what it looks like will help for the in-house academy guys.
My worry when it comes to the CPL in that regard is that the plan is to sign a CPL player that really will stand out. The problem being there, though, is because it's a competitive league and not one like a traditional farm system like baseball has. Well, even in that regard, that's not a good example, but like a system where they can go and pick players that they have. Like, how do I want to put this? I have a feeling that they feel like they can just pluck a CPL player whenever they want, not realizing that so can any other team in the world, essentially. That's my biggest concern, that they're just going to go after these guys that they consider development players, but they're not going to have, like, they won't have dibs on, really. Like, anyone else can go after them. And that's not a development system. That's just hoping that you get first crack at the latest guy that's, you know, potentially a game changer.
I think with the youth development, it really became like a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially when you got like the highlight that was Davies. Everything else just doesn't seem as exciting. So I feel like there was less, just in general in these recent years, there's been less of a focus on bringing in young talent, or just more sporadically than before. And as the CPL has come on, I mean, they've been snapping up the talent, and now it's all becoming a jumbled mess of two different leagues now, with the development team not playing games, and then CPL offering games, and now everybody getting placed all around the league, and it's a really hard place to find yourself in the Whitecap shoes, and they're gonna need to really focus on the youth these next couple of years if they want to bring it back on track.
I think, like, even pre-COVID, like, the problem with the development team is, as I see it, is like, okay, so let's say you're a young Canadian soccer player. You're like sort of the tier below, like the Theo Bair, Michael Baldissimo, Thomas Hassel level prospect, where like maybe you have long-term MLS potential, but you're not ready yet. So you're like 19, 20. Like, what reason of all the options available to you would you ever pick to play for the Whitecaps development team? You could play, if your options are university, CPL, or the Whitecaps development team, who would ever pick the Whitecaps development team? Because it's not playing in a real league, and you don't like have like a fallback option that you get with playing at the university level. So like I don't see what the incentives are there for players who like maybe for players who are under 18 who get a chance to play in like some fairly, I mean, not officially competitive, but like play some games against like men, adults, and help them make that jump. That team makes sense, but like I just don't see what, like it just doesn't make a lot of sense for a player who's like aged 18 to 23.
Yeah, there's really no appeal to what the Whitecaps can offer in that age range currently. And I guess in terms of just the guy that I might be excited about watching his develop. It's a guy that's already on the first team roster, but hasn't really, is still a ways away from actually cracking into the lineup, and that's Gianfranco Faccineri, who looked really good for Atletico Ottawa and his little stint last year, and certainly has had a lot of potential and shown that at the Canadian under-17 level and some stuff like that. So that would be the one guy down the pipeline that I definitely have a lot of faith in. But yeah, I think that it's strange because the CPL provides this massive opportunity to develop all these young guys, but I understand that the Canadian Premier League is also cautious about how it aligns itself with MLS clubs. Like, they don't want to become a pure feeder system where, the Whitecaps are just giving all their prospects to Pacific for a year and then taking them back off loan, and Pacific doesn't get anything out of that relationship other than the players for a season. I understand that's something delicate to balance, but I think you're right, Ian, in what you said, that teams like the Whitecaps are maybe not capitalizing enough on what that league has to offer, and maybe need to think a little more carefully about how they balance their own development system with, the infrastructure elsewhere in Canada.
This is just me asking. I'm curious for folks who are tracking this a little closely. Is it a surprise that Cameron Habibullah has not gotten a senior contract? And should that be worrying developmentally?
Well, I mean, I would bet everything I own that they're going to sign him this year. I think the reason that they have not signed him yet is Faccineri and Pacile, or Pachile, I don't know. Anyway, those guys have European passports, so they could sign in Europe before they turned 18. Habibullah was born in Uzbekistan, which is not part of the European Union, so he could only move to a team in Uzbekistan before he turns 18. So it's sort of like an asset management reason. I've watched him play a few times. I'm generally quite impressed. I don't think he's quite as good as Alphonso Davies, but I mean, that's not really a criticism. Very few people are as good as Alphonso Davies. But, I think there's reason to be excited about him. I don't know that he's going to step in and be a huge contributor right away, but I wouldn't be shocked to see him get a goal or two.
I think they also just want to clean up a few of their roster issues. They're organizationally, the amount of spots they have in a moment is kind of a bit of a mess. So I think once they clean that up a bit, then there'll be room in addition to that 18-year-old thing to sign him to a contract. So I think it's only a matter of time.